Welcome. We've reached Psalm 10 in our personal ponderings in the Psalms, and this psalm brings a very graphic description to us of the attitude and the actions of the ungodly. I've got a quote in my margin of my Bible from Martin Luther, who says, "There is not in my judgment a psalm which describes the mind, the manners, the works, the words, the feelings, and the fate of the ungodly with as much propriety, fullness, and light as this psalm." I can't disagree with him. We've seen David, whoever wrote this psalm, we're not sure, but we've seen David and other psalmists living in the awareness of the ever-present wickedness of the ungodly. But here, the description of them is very, very strong. He begins with a great cry to God. "Why, O Lord, do you stand far away? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble?" I'm sure you as a believer have known times in your life when you've been at least tempted to think like that, if not to ask it, because God doesn't seem to be involved. God doesn't seem to be doing anything when wickedness is all around. But then he goes on to speak about the actions and the attitude of the godless. Look at the way he describes them. Verses 2 and 4, he says they are arrogant and proud. Verse 5, they are prosperous and successful. What they do in their wickedness, they seem to get away with much of the time. Verse 6, they're secure. They say not even God can topple us. We're inviolable. Verse 7 to 9 and so on, they're foul-mouthed. Verse 8 to 11, they're violent. This is a very graphic expose of the actions and attitudes of the wicked. And underneath all that is what we would call a practical atheism. They either simply deny the existence of God, as at the end of verse 4, there is no God, that's all his thoughts. And whether he actually means there isn't a God or he's living as if there is no God. But if there is a God, look at what he says in verse 11. God has forgotten, he has hidden his face, he will never see it. He says in verse 13, God won't hold me to account. God doesn't want anything to do with me. God's not interested in what I do. I can get away with it. There's no day of reckoning, present or future, for me. And so you have this expose of the actions and the attitude of the wicked. And then you have, and here's a conundrum, here's a dilemma for the godly. You have the apparent inaction and attitude of God. He seems to stand far away. He seems to hide in times of trouble. It reminds me very much of one of my favorite Old Testament prophecies, the little prophecy of Habakkuk, when the prophet says, "How long, O Lord? How long? How long do I cry? Literally, how long do I scream in frustration and anger and pain to you? And you don't do anything about it." That's how it seems very often. And so the psalmist says here, not only does the ungodly think that God is out of sight and irrelevant, but sometimes the godly feel that God is out of sight and out of touch and almost irrelevant. And so I love his response here from verse 12 onwards. I want you to notice this. Two prayers he prays here, along with an assurance. Number one, he prays for God to arise. Verse 11, "Arise, O Lord, O God, lift up your hand, forget not the afflicted." Get involved, get stuck in, intervene, do something. It's a heartfelt cry, and there's nothing wrong based on this example of us doing exactly the same. When we see wickedness rampant in the world, when we see injustice and cruelty and the oppressed being trodden all over and taken advantage of, there would be something wrong within us if it didn't produce a great righteous indignation. God, do something. That's completely reverent and godly. So first of all, there's the idea of arise, and secondly, there's the idea of action. Do something here. Very specifically, he says in verse 15, break the arm of the wicked and evildoer, and call his wickedness to account. In other words, render the wicked powerless. Render them powerless. Don't let them get away with what they're doing for the sake of the poor and the oppressed and the afflicted. And it closes on a wonderful word of assurance. The Lord is King, and the Lord does hear the desiring cry of the afflicted. Friend, if you're feeling afflicted, if you're feeling that God is distant and unconcerned or even forgetful, take heart from this psalm. So did this psalmist. But he also was in no doubt that actually God would act and God would hold evildoers to account. The Lord bless you.